Bet the Board presents Stay Green. Stay Green is your first stop for all the metrics, matchups, and money-making opportunities at the track each race week. This is Stay Green, the NASCAR betting podcast. Here are your hosts, Todd Furman and racing analyst Chris Wormy.
Welcome into episode 2, season 2 of the Stay Green podcast, the Bet the Board production, part of the Wondery Podcast Network. I'm your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by my co-host and racing analyst extraordinaire, Chris Wormy. But before we let Chris tell us how he spent last Sunday afternoon and diving into this weekend's Pala 400 from Auto Club Speedway, some housekeeping. Chris and I wanted to discuss the future of Stay Green with you, all of our loyal Bet the Board listeners. Last week, there wasn't a show for Daytona. The betting opportunities, as everyone has come to realize, aren't great with plate races, and we got Demolition Derby late like most of us anticipated. But the real reason for no Daytona podcast is at the 11th hour, NASCAR informed us they didn't have the funds to further its commitment to Stay Green for the 2023 season. Having already recorded a season preview with Danielle Trotta in good faith as negotiations were ongoing, it left Chris, myself, and the rest of Bet the Board in a very difficult, precarious position. We're in the business of creating informative content at an unmatched level, which comes with increased sweat equity where monetization is important. Nobody expects to show up at work Monday for free. In saying that, our mission for Bet the Board has always been since day one back in 2014. We will continue to be about producing sports betting content that raises the industry bar, and it's clear we achieved that in year one of Stay Green. Rather than shutter the show without support from NASCAR, we wholeheartedly believe that Stay Green product is far too good and candidly is much needed for a sport that lacks great, actionable betting content that's created by professional bettors for bettors of all ability levels. The messages, emails, and comments received by Chris, Bet the Board, Payne, and me confirmed our gut instinct that Stay Green must go on for the 2023 season, as we'll figure out the rest later. We have a tremendous distribution partner in Wondery Amazon that believes in Bet the Board and the type of content we create above and beyond everyone else in the space. Always remember, though, word of mouth, questions, and feedback create the kind of awareness and encourage us to heighten the bar with every single show we produce. So help us spread the word by retweeting, tell a friend, a family member, your coworkers, and help make Stay Green the flagship NASCAR betting show, even if the league chose to pursue other platforms they deem fit for gambling content. All right, Wormser, with some of those formalities out of the way, now's the time of the show, before we get into the nuts and bolts and we try and figure out who's going to grab the checkered flag at Fontana this weekend, that you can share with our loyal Stay Green listenership what you were doing Sunday afternoon while the majority of the NASCAR community, casual fans and diehards alike, were glued to the edge of their seat watching the longest Daytona 500 in recorded history.
Well, that's funny you ask, because, Todd, I'm a weak man, and I don't have the ability to watch a NASCAR race without forming an opinion and making a live bet. So it's very important that I find myself very busy during this race. And you know what? My lovely new wife, we haven't even been married 2 months now, she had an over 35 soccer game. And so I went there with a 6-pack of beer and watched women's soccer and just enjoyed the hell out of myself. And I followed Max Homa, a good friend of mine, on the PGA Tour app, and I just sat there and didn't even look at a box score or a live update at all. So I was watching.
All right, most importantly here, did you at least have a little bit of action on the soccer match? You know, it's total, a side, a live bet.
Oh,
there had to be somebody that you were able to get down a few dollars, shotgun and a beer, at least make it worth your while when you were out there watching her.
Listen, usually under 2 is a home run or a pounder, but yeah, a late goal by the other team. Just a devastating loss for my wife's team. They scored with 10 seconds to go in stoppage time. We still haven't recovered over here at the Wormy household, but I mean, listen, there was a lot of guys just sitting around with little coolers sitting next to them, enjoying the the beautiful sunshine in Arizona, which is apparently disappeared.
We're going to get
no
into that. Obviously, it's going to factor into how we break down the race this weekend from Auto Club Speedway, because Mother Nature may have her say in exactly what we can and cannot get done on the track. But for those folks new to the Stay Green podcast, just going to lay out the format a little bit for you. We typically break this up into stages, much like you see in the NASCAR series, Stage 1, Stage 2, and Stage 3. Things will be a little bit different with our second show of the year. No guest to speak of here. Our goal this season to land some of the biggest name in the sport, make them feel comfortable throwing around some of the gambling vernacular. And again, shout out to Danielle Trotta. She was brave enough to be the first guest of the season when we previewed things. And a lot of that information is still very relevant for those folks that haven't listened to that podcast. So first things first, as far as Stage 1, and we'll look to shorten this up as the season goes on this year. Congrats to Ricky Stenhouse, winner of the Daytona 500, and he becomes the 20th different driver to win a points race in the next-gen car. And Martin Truex had won the Clash. Ryan Blaney won the All-Star race. So pretty much everybody right now who's a part of these charter teams has found a way to grab a checkered flag in one capacity or another. And it's exactly what NASCAR wants in a level of parity.
Oh, of course. I mean, I didn't get to
watch I know.
Much,
you made that
but,
abundantly clear already.
Okay, yeah. So just so you know, everybody, I did not watch the Daytona 500. Well, I'm happy for Ricky Stenhouse. It's the first time he's won in a few years now, and obviously I think he's only won on plate tracks. And, the guy needed a win. And you know what? The Daytona 500 will usually take care of the next couple years of your life. So maybe he can kind of parlay this into being competitive on non-super speedway tracks. This week is actually a good track for him. He ran well there last year. He's a dirt tracker. Anytime things get super loose and you tend to lose grip, he's going to be good. But overall, speed weeks, I some of the ratings came in, and I saw some stuff on Twitter about the ratings, and man, 8 million people tuned into this race, or tuned in, which is 4 times more people that tune into a Formula One race. So for all those Drive to Survive people out there, you're still not even close. You're about 4x short.
Yeah, at least domestically they are. Internationally, we have a long way to go with NASCAR getting there. But we have to start one place first, and I got to be careful when it comes to taking shots at Drive to Survive, which I have watched all of the seasons. I think the new one comes out soon, that I have a member of my household that says she won't watch NASCAR in its entirety. I'm gradually trying to convert her a little bit as we go. But you're right. It's obviously positive sign to see some of those ratings there, knowing that people are tuning in to the Great American Race. And it's a credit to the NASCAR TV partners that bill this kind of as the Super Bowl of the sport. Whether or not we like plate racing, I think is irrelevant in the grand scheme of things, because people want to watch and see it all unfold. You mentioned Speed Week, though, and I do want to be critical, though, of the format that we saw. And regardless of where we go, why are we going out there? I mean, qualifying without practice is fine, but why are we running the duels and then having practice? I mean, it makes no sense. Do it the other way around. At least let these guys run practice, because by the time you get into race conditions and you're running 60 laps, those practices are completely irrelevant. And you saw a lot of that in terms of the slow nature of on-track activity.
Well, these cars just unload and go qualify. I mean, some of them weren't even capable of getting out there on the track. I mean, you had cars bouncing around. You didn't like
to look at Connor Daly. I think his car drove like a 1992 Honda Accord that I used to drive around when I refused to spend money to get my shocks replaced.
At least let him shake down the car. At least make sure that their ride heights are normal. I think it's really difficult. It's a big ask, and also, we've had all off season, to work on these cars. I just think it's important, your first time to a super speedway, let's get something out on the track. And I don't want to get into the politics of it.
No, for sure.
If they can't race the car, if they can't race the car, just cold, then they shouldn't be in the Daytona 500. It's like, well, what if there's an issue? And I think with safety being, kind of at the top of the list, especially this year with the microscope that was put on it last year, let the guys get out there and get comfortable before you throw them into a competitive environment that have points implications.
Well, one thing I will say too on it, I like the fact that we saw some big names get into the Daytona 500. Travis Pastrana is able to qualify on speed, but at the same time, I'm not sure it would have done justice to the full-time Cup drivers if Travis Pastrana finishes inside the top 5. And so I'm glad on some level that didn't unfold in the 67 car, that he was competitive. He finished all the laps, and that's what 23XI Racing kind of said they wanted to happen. But I'm just glad that he wasn't in the mix for a podium finish late, because it would diminish how difficult that style of racing really is. And we know there's a massive luck component involved every time we go to Daytona, Talladega, and of course now Atlanta with the repave.
Yeah, I mean, that might be a black eye if Pastrana goes out there and wins the Daytona 500. I think it would maybe reveal the amount of luck that's involved. Now, I do think anybody can get lucky and win there once. You look at, someone like Trevor Bayne who went out there and did it when they had that tandem draft. But, there's also guys like Denny Hamlin who've won it 3 times. Like, it might be lucky once. Yep. I don't think it's lucky 3 times. So there's definitely an element of skill, 100%. But, to have, someone like Tony Stewart never win the 500. Yeah, he won at Daytona, but never win the 500. Goes to show you that, that there's some luck involved, but still. Yeah,
don't mention that to Kyle Busch, because we saw that he was not all too thrilled with his post-race presser saying under the old rules, he would have that elusive Daytona 500 championship. Instead, by circumstances beyond his control, it remains elusive as far as one of the big, Triple Crown races, so to speak, or crown jewels as far as NASCAR is concerned for Kyle Busch. But for those folks who are unfamiliar with the voices you're hearing here, you can follow Chris on Twitter. That's at ChrisWormy15. I'm, of course, Todd Furman. You can follow me on Twitter, and most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And as far as recaps, look, Daytona's fun. I'm glad we're talking about it, but there's not much to be learned from that track that we can take and apply going forward. So I think we're better served to kind of jump into stage 2 and kind of reintroduce some of the NASCAR basics before we do get into a full comprehensive breakdown of Auto Club Speedway and the Pala 400 this weekend. So I'm going to be the idiot here, Worm. I'm going to ask you simple questions for those folks who may be looking to learn a little bit more about NASCAR and bet it slightly more seriously than they've ever done in the past. Because last year when we started this podcast, we picked up in the middle of the season. Now people are going to have a chance to be with us for 30-plus races. There'll be the occasional bye week for us as well in the middle. But I wanted to get your overall philosophy on betting NASCAR, kind of how you got started in this space, and what goes into your process each and every week for tracks that you define as being bettable.
So the first thing I want to talk about when it comes to betting on NASCAR is understand what your incentive is. Like, what are you trying to get out of this? If you're just trying to watch a race and have fun, well, I think that you should probably, take your own opinion and place wagers that don't mean anything to you. I think that whatever you're trying to accomplish is very important. Now, for myself, and I know for yourself, Todd, the goal is to make money. If I don't make money betting NASCAR, I don't eat. So,
and you know what? For our listeners who think you're being facetious here, you do this full time. It is your primary source of income when it comes to betting NASCAR. Those 36 races, or 30 races, we'll call it, without the super speedways, are what you live for to kind of be able to survive and pay for your livelihood.
Yeah, and that's just very different than maybe a casual fan. So the goal here is to kind of, I guess, marry the two together. Someone that wants to do it for fun and has a day-to-day job, and then someone like myself who does this where they rely on some sort of ROI for their way of life. So I think it's really important to kind of identify what it is you're trying to get out of, betting. So I think that for the casual fan, it's important to maybe impart a little bit of your own wisdom. You watch NASCAR, you're participating in these races. So whatever you think, you should maybe go a little bit of that, but also try to, encompass some of the things that we talk about on this podcast. So, Spider from Barstool, who has his own little podcast, he asked me once, how do you make money betting on NASCAR? And very facetiously, I said, bet on the faster cars. And so I guess in a nutshell, my biggest philosophy or key takeaway would be bet on the faster cars and you have a better chance of making money.
Astute observations there, because the fastest car wins a NASCAR race, what, maybe 15 to 20% of the time for us?
Yeah, maybe slightly more, but man, I think that I think that's one thing, and I've always tried to try to figure out what it is that I do. Yes, I bet on the fastest car, but it's more than that. It's marrying the price or looking at it through an odds lens and trying to figure out, okay, who's the best bet based on the car that they have, their history at the track, and the odds. And I think that that's like that kind of the creative side of creating a race card. So that way, when you have all of the information, okay, what bets are going to allow me to make the most money, risking the least amount of money? And that's kind of my philosophy is I don't want to lose bets, but I also need to maximize.
And I think that's a great way to look at it, because there's so many different ways to skin a cat. And I know it's a cliche that gets overused a ton in sports betting, but you have guys that do things on feel. You have guys that'll bet sporting events, and it just doesn't pertain to NASCAR. It can be a variety of other pursuits as well that'll do it on information that gets shared with them. You have the modelers out there who realize, hey, look, I can lose 3 or 4 races in a row, but if I'm consistently taking long shots, the win-loss record might not be there, but at the end of the day, ROI is the key. Or they're guys who take your approach where every race is its own snowflake. You go in with your preconceived notions. You may do a little bit of stuff pre-week for numbers that are off, but the lion's share of things that you're going to do to build a healthy portfolio comes after you start to see a little bit more data. You can factor that in and take advantage of the betting markets that are out there. And I think it dovetails perfectly kind of into the next question, the importance of having multiple outs. If you're going to do this with any level of seriousness, we have 33 states with some form of legalized sports betting. Everybody has access to some of the different outs. But give yourself the opportunity to make the same bet and be able to maximize your return instead of betting into some of the high hold markets. And you and I have been critical. Look, a lot of the biggest name sports books out there, kudos to them for offering more extensive NASCAR markets. But when the holds are through the roof, it's basically a license to steal without a loaded gun.
Yeah, it's so important. And I think that that's one thing that's overlooked. I have people that say, well, I'd like to bet NASCAR, get your picks and, try to make money. And they say, I use one website. And it's like, well, that is not going to be a profitable long run. The whole idea in what we're doing by having multiple outs is reducing the hold that the casino keeps especially in their futures market. So you always want to be shopping for the best price. And I guess an easy way to look at it would be like, let's say you want to buy Tesla stock and it's selling for, what I don't even know what Tesla stock is at. So $170 or $135. Let's just say it's selling for $135 at one place, but you can also buy it for $124 somewhere else. Well, you should probably buy it at the place where you can get it for $124 because that's what we're doing when we say price shopping. And if you don't have multiple outs, you're just reducing your opportunity of winning before you even start. So it's not one of those things where you should do it. It's like you have to do it if you expect
and
to
honestly,
make money
look, we're not telling folks that are out there listening, we're not here to sit on a soapbox or preach or anything like that. For those folks that have one book they lean on, give yourself a second book. For those folks that have 2 books, give yourself a third, and try and do all the simple things that you can to further distribute some of your gambling bankroll into different shops that'll give you a number of different betting opportunities. We'll get into some of the X's and O's, the machinations of how these markets are created as we get deeper into the season. I don't want to get too bogged down right now in some of the specifics, but I have a soapbox that I'm more than happy to try and use to talk about the offerings and share some of our sentiments on exactly what's going on in this space on a variety of fronts. But without further ado, we can wave the green-white checkered flag on stage 2 unless you had anything that you kind of wanted to add before we deep dive the race at Auto Club Speedway this weekend.
Tesla stock closed at 200 today, but it was 140 30 days ago. So I just want to say that I was somewhere in the range of...
I'm very proud of you for going forward for some of our speculative investors. We're going to give you a 30 to 40% margin of error, plus or minus, and you'll be able to turn one hell of a profit when it comes to betting cars on the track. Auto Club Speedway, bittersweet for you and I. This has typically been one of our more profitable tracks over the years, as any high tire wear has typically become. Be the last time that we see this 2-mile high-speed oval in Southern California. No race on the schedule, most likely for 2024. Going to be reconfigured into a half-mile, I believe, high-speed racetrack there, so we'll see exactly what it looks like. But for this season, high tire wear, high-speed D-shaped 2-mile oval, 75 feet wide with a 15-foot apron, 14 degrees of banking between turns 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and this is where I lean on you for comps. But Worm, heaven help you if you tell me you're going to use Michigan as a comp for what we're going to see Sunday at Fontana.
Yeah, I think we put that to rest last year. The biggest thing I can say when it comes to, Michigan is a very similar layout, almost identical, and same with as far as distance is concerned. Where there's a massive difference is the tire wear. And I know that we can sit there till we're blue in the face and tell you about tire wear, but for you to understand fully what we mean by tire wear is at Michigan, your on throttle time in the corner will be almost 100% at the start of a green flag run with fresh tires. The same will happen at Auto Club Speedway. Almost full. You'll probably let out a little bit at Auto Club, but 20 laps into a run, you're still almost full throttle in the corners at Michigan, whereas you are letting off for 3 seconds at Auto Club because you've lost so much grip. And I think that's the easiest way to kind of quantify what it is to lose grip. It's just less on throttle time in the corners. You're constantly trying to gather the car up underneath you and find different lines that might work better for your particular car. And a lot of the times it's really close to the bottom, and then later as tires wear off, it migrates more to the top. So you have to have a car working on both the bottom and the top to make passes. But Michigan is definitely not a comp track. We're obviously looking at Darlington and Homestead, but even those they have their nuances that are different. So please do not just take results from either one of those races and say, okay, I can make super informed bets at Fontana, just because they still are very different, but they are high tire wear, so that's why we use them.
Yeah, and at this weekend, of course, to use the term coined by America's crew chief Larry McReynolds, you will not see a lot of gas and go, if any. You will not see 2-tire stops. Everything will be for Mr. Feelgoods being put on the cars for handling and for speed, other than if you get to a green-white checkered situation late in a race and somebody wants to become a sitting duck out front or try and value a little bit of track position. When you look at Auto Club, Speedway, recent winners, there used to be 2 times annually that we'd race here through 2010. Kyle Larson grabbed the checkered flag last year during the COVID season. In 2021, we did not race here. Back in 2020, it was Alex Bowman. 2019, Kyle Busch. 2018, Kyle Larson. And 2017 was 7-time NASCAR champion Jimmy Johnson. Before we get into the race itself and what you're using other than comp tracks and some of the data points, I've kind of teased the forecast at the top of the show. Weather doesn't look good here in Vegas. The weather doesn't look good where you are in Phoenix, and the weather sure as hell doesn't look good in California for this. Do we think we're going to get some on-track activity and get full practices, or are we looking at a potentially unload and race come Sunday afternoon?
Man, I really hope it's not unload and race. For us, as we kind of let the week unfold, we like to take a few chances early in the week with a few outright prices and maybe a couple matchups where we think that we can find some value where those prices will kind of move our direction. So, for example, if we bet someone at 10-1 early in the week, we plan on them maybe opening at 4 or 5-1 after practice and qualifying. So we want to make sure that we capture some of that value early in the week. Now, the reason that some of those odds and prices change is because they actually do practice and qualify. And this week, it's supposed to rain every day in Fontana until Wednesday. So I'm hoping Mother Nature cooperates. With old worn out tracks like this, we tend to find weepers, and weepers are little slits in the track that tend to have, moisture come through as cars find the track, and they just won't race when there's weepers. This is going to be hard to kind of watch this weekend, because I think that as soon as they get, some dry track, I think they're going to put cars on there. I don't know if they'll practice and qualify. I certainly think like I said earlier in the show, with safety being such an issue this year, I certainly hope that they get out on the track, but I am not sure that that's going to be the case. Only time will tell. And hopefully just meteorologists are wrong. There's a 60% chance of rain, which means there's a 40% chance it doesn't rain. So hopefully
I like that glass
hits.
half full mentality there to try and utilize it. So we would love to see cars on track. Obviously, you talk about the weepers, part of the thing contributing to why they're going to do a repave, or at least why they did at Atlanta for some of these high tire wear tracks. So if Mother Nature gives us a window, they'll do everything they can to get the cars on track, and hopefully we can see things unfold as we'd like. When you're looking at some of the race odds for this upcoming weekend, Kyle Larson, pretty much the favorite across the board. You can find him as low as 5-1, upwards of 7-1. He's followed typically at a lot of shops by Denny Hamlin and Chase Elliott, kind of in that range. And then it really is a logjam with drivers priced anywhere from 10-1, 12-1, 18-1, a who's who: Ryan Blaney, Kyle Busch, Christopher Bell, Tyler Reddick, Ross Chastain, Martin Truex Jr., Joey Logano, William Byron, you name it. All the big names up there. You can cast a pretty wide net in this particular spot. So when you begin to try and approach the pre-week numbers that were out there and you look at the favorites, you look at the value, I guess it makes the most sense to start with the man who won this race a year ago, a California native in Kyle Larson, and how you feel about the way he's being priced pre-week, given that the last 8 races we've seen at Auto Club Speedway for Kyle Larson, he's got 4 top 2 finishes, but he does also have 4 finishes outside the top 10.
I think if you look at last year's race, yes, he did win. And, there's obviously you have to give him credit for that. But I would say he wasn't even a top 5 car. I know that sometimes, you alluded to earlier in the show that, maybe 20% of the time, I'd say maybe it's a little higher than that the fastest car actually wins a race. This clearly was a situation where the fastest car did not win the race. I don't even know that a top 5 car won the race. So I know that recency bias, and he won there last time, and he definitely showed some speed. By the way, he showed a little speed at Homestead last year. I think he clubbed the field.
Oh, is this where you're going to go about patting yourself on the back, saying he was record-breaking speed, and that Kyle Larson, if there were no other cars on the track, would have broken every land speed record or whatever the hell else you said that was so ridiculous and erroneous?
Yeah, I could keep going if you want, but either way, I still think Larson probably should be the favorite. However, he did not show the speed last year that was a race-winning car. He definitely got it done late on a couple restarts where he fought off Daniel Suarez, which we didn't realize at the time was going to be a contender. So we may be discounting Kyle Larson a little bit, but at 6.5 to 1 or 7 to 1, I'd rather see him unload super fast and bet him at maybe a plus 450 or 5 to 1.
I think when you look at the way the odds makers adjusted some of the prices last season, given the uncertainty of the next gen car and the parity that we saw, we didn't see a lot of race favorites even after practice and qualifying. If they had the most dominant machine through practice, they qualified on the pole, go off at the odds that we grew accustomed to years ago. And you kind of took me under your wing to teach me the nuances of the sport, where Kevin Harvick could go off at 3 to 2. I mean, those days I think are in the past. So to your point, Kyle Larson go out there, have a great machine. I can't see a scenario where he opens up less than 4.5 to 1. So what's the incentive to try and run and bet him at 5.5 or 6 right now until you know exactly what he's working with?
I think that's really important. I mean, anything that you're going to bet on from an outright and a matchup perspective, I guess from any perspective, you want to make sure you're predicting where the market's headed. Because if you don't think you're beating the market now and you think you might get a better price after practice and qualifying, well, you sure as hell shouldn't be betting him right now. And, I think when there's very little downside risk, like waiting on Kyle Larson, like Kyle's not going to go off at 3 to 1. He'd have to be a rocket to go off at 3 to 1. And by the way, if he does, we'll go ahead and take him at 3 to 1. But I'd rather. It's
all right. We're still kind of in the preseason. I'm not going to pick on you for your inability to articulate just yet.
I mean, I'd rather wait and see him unload and feel comfortable with his car, because there's a good chance he could unload and they could be off a little bit, and you might see a higher price on him, maybe an 8 to 9 to 1, especially if you see other really competitive drivers like maybe a Chase Elliott or a Kyle Busch unload super fast, put it on the pole, or at least qualify well. That could boost Kyle Larson's odds up. So at this point, I'm not interested in Larson. I do think he should be the favorite, but I think he's probably properly priced.
Well, we may as well go from one Kyle to another, and I'm a little bit reluctant to do this because I think other than maybe Kyle Busch's wife, Samantha, you've pumped up the tires on the number 8 machine for RCR more than anybody this offseason. So let's see if he can live up to those expectations. But when you look at Kyle Busch, Tyler Reddick driving the same car last year, led almost half the laps and arguably had the best car on track until he got caught up in a muddled mess late. When you look at Kyle Busch, shown an ability to compete through the first 2 races, misfortune in the Daytona 500 that we talked about at the top of the show, and it was Joey Logano driving through his rear at the Clash. But this has arguably been one of Kyle Busch's best tracks. We saw a little bit of movement early on pre-week from 12 to 1 at some shops down to 10 to 1. What are your expectations for Kyle Busch when he gets to go racing for the first time as a member of RCR?
Well, this is where you're going to have to keep me in check, Todd, because I obviously have a lot on him at 18 to 1. I have a lot on his over 1.5 wins. So obviously my personal bias is going to lie with Kyle. So if ever I get off on a Kyle tangent, I hope that you and all the loyal listeners out there kind of reel me back in and be like, well, Kyle wasn't actually that good, or he might not actually be this good this week. Listen, Kyle was trash there last year, and he struggled to make finishes. I think that they were very aggressive in that 18 Toyota, and they made some mistakes. I think that's why he found himself with a lot of DNFs or a lot of poor finishes where he was maybe had a tire failure or a late spin that kind of cost him the chance at a win. It wasn't for a lack of speed. Now, if you want to look at specifically Fontana, this is one of his best tracks. And I don't like to look back too much at history because the cars are very different. The drivers and the people that the other drivers he's competing against are also different. But man, he of 23 races, I think he's got something like 10 top fives. That's incredible. I mean, this is a great track for Kyle Busch. I know that in the last 7 races there, I try to keep it, a tighter window on what I look back at because 23 races is a long time. I'd rather look at like his last 7, and I think he's got 5 top 10s in the last 7, and that's very competitive. I know you don't have to. It's hard to win races. It's hard to win golf tournaments. It's just like it's hard to win races, and they don't just give those away. So I think that he's going to be really good this week. I thought we would see him open a little higher. I know that we had discussed this maybe before the clash that we might see like a 14 or 15 to 1. You laughed at me. And then he opened 12, and you're like, well, maybe we might see that 14 to 1. At this point, now that the market's moved a little bit, there are some places that still have 11. I would say consensus is 10. I'm going to go ahead and wait and see how he unloads. I'd way rather, see him look really fast and we get him at, 6 or 7 to 1 than take a chance on someone that might just struggle a little bit with a new team and communication. And jump on him at a shorter price. He has looked super strong. I mean, what he did at the Clash was impressive, getting spun out late and still driving back up to 3rd. Obviously had a chance to win the 500. So I think that he's kind of clicking, and I look forward to him having a good season. But I do need everyone to kind of keep me in check.
We'll do whatever we can in that regard. But to highlight your point, when you look at Kyle Busch, and obviously some of this history not exactly relevant this weekend, active leader at Fontana in just about everything from wins, top 5s, top 10s, and laps led. So clearly a place he feels more than comfortable and would love to be able to grab a checkered flag in the first, I call it the first real race of the season that's not Daytona and the exhibition for the Clash. Another driver that Kyle has already had choice words for so far this season would be Joey Logano. And Joey Logano has oftentimes been a bridesmaid at Auto Club Speedway, but never a bride. 15 Cup starts here, still looking for that first elusive win, but he's been a model of consistency. A 5th place finish, 12th, 2nd, 5th, 4th, 7th, but he's only led 30 laps in that span. Your feelings on Joey Logano are well documented about sometimes being willing to try and bet him in the outright market, but how are you approaching the 22 this weekend, a driver that typically has performed real well when it comes to the West Coast swing?
Well, Andy's great at high wear tracks. If you look at the last year in this car, which I feel like is more relevant than actual historical data at this particular track, he did really, really well on high wear tracks. He was, I think Homestead might have been a little bit of an anomaly where he wasn't quite as fast as where we thought he was going to be, but Darlington was a great track for him. Obviously ran up front, in the kind of the top 5 throughout this race last year. He's just the kind of the model of consistency, really. I to be super cliche, I would say he does have an advantage on the pit box. I don't think that strategy is ever going to come into play at Fontana just because you're taking 4 tires in fuel if you're pitting and, anything over 5 laps, unless, they start to get a little concerned with the amount of tires used. I don't see strategy becoming an issue, but I do think Paul Wolf is, he sees around the corner better than most crew chiefs up there when it comes to strategy. So, I think that's kind of a feather in his cap, but ultimately he's going to run well. I don't think he'll win the race, but I'm not going to bet on or against him.
It makes sense. I mean, Joey's been a guy that has gone out there and really performed at high levels. He oftentimes gets written off, maybe not the sexiest driver, but he's a 2-time champion right now. And we've seen what he's been able to do, how prolific he's been when the series shifts out west. We talked about Kyle Busch a little bit earlier, and I think it makes sense to try and figure out exactly what we can expect from Kyle Busch's old team in JGR. I don't necessarily want to spend time on Ty Gibbs. I don't know if we're going to touch on him and talk about his overall relevance in terms of winning races early on in the season until he proves he can compete week in, week out. But when you look at the trio of veterans on this race team, and yes, I'm calling Christopher Bell a veteran at this point, knowing what he was able to do last year in the postseason. JGR, 3 wins combined at the track, 93 career starts here, 20 top 5s, 40 top 10s, 5 poles, and over 1,000 laps led. when you look at Denny Hamlin, you look at Christopher Bell, and you look at Martin Truex Jr., who won this race here back in 2018, what are you realistically expecting from the 11, from the 19, and from the 20? I have to believe that these guys all have a chance to win, but they definitely didn't show some of that same consistency you'd like to try and clamor for them the way they're currently being priced.
Especially last year. I think Toyota as a whole struggled at Fontana, but I think that was, Toyota wide. And I think that they fixed that issue because if you look at the very next week, they were the fastest cars at Las Vegas. So whatever the issue was, it was kind of an anomaly. They were able to fix that problem and kind of move forward. I mean, they were the fastest on mile and a half, I would say, pretty much the entire year last year. If we want to start with Denny Hamlin, I think this guy had a chance to win more than any other Gibbs driver consistently. Now, I know that Chris Bell was, more towards the end of the season was able to pick up wins, but I think if you look at week in and week out, Denny Hamlin was constantly running in the top 5. In addition to running in the top 5, I would say Hamlin and Bell, I guess Kyle Busch and Truex love to just make mistakes, whether it was blow a tire, speeding on pit road, spinning out under your own volition. Like all of these things just kind of plagued all of JGR last year. It certainly wasn't for a lack of speed. However, with this new tire and the shorter sidewalls, I think the aggressiveness on air pressures really came back to haunt some of these guys that were super fast on these mile and a half tracks. And I think that there were some failures. There were also some people that just lost grip later in runs. So I expect this whole Gibbs team to be, they can win everywhere. If Hamlin, Bell, and Truex, they can win anywhere, especially at those mile and a half tracks from what I've seen. And historically, they're great short track racers. So I'm not saying that they have that I'm, kind of counting them out this week. I would like to see them unload better, but those 3 drivers, they can win week in and week out. I call Chris Bell AI, and not because of Allen Iverson. It's almost like he just, like artificial intelligence. He learned so much during the race. He's so young, and he looks even younger. But this guy just figures out a way to get it done. And late in the race, if there's someone that has 4 fresh tires and maybe he's restarting, 10th or 12th, and you kind of written him off, man, if it's Chris Bell, check yourself, because that guy won 2 races when he needed to late with fresh tires at tracks where it was hard to pass. So I think he has so much upside, but Denny Hamlin's a competitor, and I think Martin Truex kind of showed what he can do at the Clash. We didn't see that kind of fight out of him at all last year. So I think that, it's hard when you have something going on at home in your home life, and I don't want to speak too much about that, but listen, when you have home stuff going on, it's hard to go out there and do your job. So this might be one of those things where he's just able to concentrate on racing, and, I'm pulling for him. I've become a Truex fan, kind of, I'd say later in life. Like
you are the old grizzled veteran around over
NASCAR
here
for years. Yeah, exactly. But I'm a Truex fan, and I like to see him win. And it was cool to see him win at the Clash, and I think he can get some wins this year. But JGR, never count them out. They are going to be competitive for sure. They just it's the whole the Toyota, that the Joe Gibbs team, and the drivers especially. That's a winning tradition. I would not be shocked if they won 10 races between the
I'll have to cut you off. When you start to go into NASCAR nostalgia and talk about the days when you were watching Fireball Roberts on a black and white TV, that's when I'll know you're completely full of shit, and I'll have to rein you back in there. Christopher Bell, of those 3 guys, honestly, the one I'm most interested to watch, given the fact he's got such limited experience at Fontana as a member of the Cup Series, finished 36th and 38th, driver rating sub 50 in both of those races. But we saw him come of age, to your point, and really mature as last season progressed, that if that light bulb clicked on, he's going to be a force every single week. But you mentioned the Toyota camp in general, and while I know it's not technically a Joe Gibbs racing car, there's obviously an alliance here. Tyler Reddick, most dominant car here last year as a member of RCR, showed an ability to race through the field, was outstanding at Darlington on the high tire wear as well. Finish at Homestead, rather misleading, got tangled up, so his overall averages on high tire wear weren't where they would have been if you were looking at the 4 comp tracks. But Tyler Reddick, discount him at your own peril. He's a guy that I was hoping came out a touch more inflated. 12-1 wasn't enough to get me to involve. I know there were a couple books that opened as high as 15.
Well, this is going to be interesting. I'm really looking forward to this race because I'm really curious on this Tyler Reddick, Kyle Busch dynamic. Is it the car or is it the driver? Because last year, Tyler Reddick was a rocket. I mean, it was very clear that he was the best car from start to finish in this race. I think he started between 4th and 6th and was leading, and he kind of set sail. If he ever got mired back in traffic, he was able to drive straight through, whereas Kyle dropped like a rock. I mean, he was an absolute anchor before he spun out and finished a few laps down. So this is one of those things where, is this move to 23XI, is it a lateral move, or is it a move where you have an increase in the equipment, or is it a decrease? And right now, I would say it's a lateral. Man, I say short run. I think it's a decrease. I really do. I do. I think that the 8 car was faster than both the 23 and the 45 pretty consistently last year. And I know that's probably an unpopular opinion, but where I'm at right now and what I've seen just in the first 2 races of the year, albeit they're an exhibition and the Daytona 500, but man, I think RCR seems really, really strong and motivated. I know that those are really unquantifiable when it comes to like tangible things. However, I do think Tyler Reddick on these high line tracks is one of the best. It's him, it's Kyle Larson, it's Chase Briscoe, and the old Kevin Harvick. So it'll be interesting to see. I'm going to need to see more from Tyler Reddick before I get involved with him at a track where he was good last year, just because I don't know that these setups with these Toyotas are as good as what he unloaded with in the 8 car. And the other thing, I'm pretty sure that this is true, that the 23XI, they end up with Gibbs crews, and they're not going to get the top Gibbs crews.
One amendment to that, and we'll double check. And again, not the best content from a podcast standpoint for us to kind of sit here. I believe they made a concerted effort to bring their pit crews in-house. So we'll have to double check on that for this year, because I think I listened to an interview with Denny where he said that was one of the things they wanted to do to be a more serious race team. But I want to verify that, and if we find the nugget, we'll make sure we share it with the listeners next week. But my gut tells me that they have their own pit crews now that they're working to try and train. I'm sure in a similar mold, but they're not sharing the same personnel with Joe Gibbs Racing.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure last year
it was 100% last year was the case.
But this year, okay, so this year's new. That'd be great because, you want to make sure you have the top guys, like 100%. I mean, pit road is so important these days, and it's always been important. I know that we're kind of beating a dead horse here, but listen, the pit times are so close now that it's almost like a detriment to have like a high beta, which means you're going to have super fast times and super slow times. It's really important just to have consistent times, in my opinion. Like, you can make back 1 or 2 spots, especially at Fontana. So I think Tyler Reddick will be competitive. I just don't think he's going to be in the same.
No, and I think that's a good thing to factor into the calculus here, because if he's not, you're paying a price based on the car that we saw last year, more so than the machine he could be driving here. So I think that's valuable information, and one that we're going to want to monitor during practice, assuming we do get practice. The one race team that we haven't hit on in great detail, we obviously talked about Kyle Larson, who's a rightful race favorite, and I don't want to get bogged down here. So when you look at HMS, look, Chase Elliott, we talked about it last year until we were blue in the face, that the results didn't mesh with the kind of speed that he showed throughout the course of races. William Byron and Alex Bowman almost feel like the forgotten men sometimes in that particular team. But of those 3 guys, is there a driver that you'd like to highlight that you're interested to see unload this weekend, and more importantly, see how he'll perform on race day?
I think both Bowman and Byron are interesting just because of their price. I think all things being equal, it's Larson, it's Elliott, Byron, then Bowman. But when you start to see, we've seen some 18-1s on Byron, up to 24-1 on Bowman. I mean, Bowman won here, in 2020 and kind of dominated. So anytime there's high tire wear, Bowman could be a player. And I think last year, William Byron definitely was a top 3 or 4 car all the entire race until, Reddick kind of slipped, blew a tire, hit the wall, and then Bowman got into him. But he was up there all day. Even when he was shuffled back in traffic, he had a slow stop. And I'm talking about Byron still. When he had a slow stop, he was able to work his way back up from like 15th back up to 4th or 5th in only a few laps. And that's what I love about about this track is if you make a mistake, but you're still in kind of the top 20, you can make up positions quickly if your car is hooked up. I think that both Byron and Bowman have a lot of value heading into the weekend. Now, will they unload well? We're not sure, and I'm not willing to kind of take that risk with Bowman. I think that Byron has kind of solidified himself as someone a little bit more consistent than Bowman, and that's why I would lean towards a Byron play versus a
And
Bowman
I think when
play
you look at William
this point.
Byron last year, he finished 34th for those folks that are scoreboard watching. But the reality of things, stage 1, he finished 3rd. Stage 2, he finished 9th. Led 16 laps on the day. Ran 98% of his laps in the top 15. Had the highest percentage of quality passes and actually finished with a 6 overall driver rating. The 24 for me last year was one of the more enigmatic drivers all season long because he started off the season red hot. And then he has an 18-race stretch where he had one top 10 finish in the middle of the season, and then he finishes like a house on fire with an average finish of 9th over the final 10 races. So if he can regain some of that form he closed with last year, we'll see how quickly the value is zapped out of betting William Byron, not just in the outright market, but also in some of his head-to-heads.
Well, remember, let's throw a little asterisk in there. He should have won Darlington, but Joey Logano just used him as a break in the 12th race of the season. I mean, Byron, Joey didn't even try to pass him. So that's another high wear track where William Byron finished outside the top 10 and arguably had the best car. So that's why it's important to make sure you watch these races. And I think it's important to realize that the stats don't always tell the whole story. And, for someone like William Byron, who had a dominant car, or at least could have won the race at Darlington, he gets this DNF, or I don't know where he finished. I think he finished, maybe 18th or 19th, when he could have easily won the race. So that's why it's important to tune in and actually use your eyeballs when it comes to handicapping
obviously,
these races.
you want to take advantage of all the tools at your disposal. We can only cover so much ground in the 45 minutes we're with our NASCAR enthusiasts each and every week, but there is a lot of great content everywhere throughout the community as far as some of the grassroots initiative. And do want to give a shout out to one of our guys out there, Picks by Blaze. You can follow Derek Yoder on Twitter. Does an outstanding job on Wednesday nights. I know you listen to what he does with the NASCAR community. It continues to grow, and I think it's a very thoughtful forum for people to ask questions, learn from one another, and it's so much different than what I see in the rest of sports gambling Twitter, where the relationships are adversarial. This seems to foster a community, and I think it goes a long, long way. So I wanted to give Derek a shout out there and applaud all the hard work and heavy lifting he does to try and make NASCAR, the betting side of things, at least a lot more inviting and welcoming community for bettors of all ability levels. We've gone through the favorite. We've talked about some of the value propositions that are out there. And then, of course, there are the other guys, drivers priced 25-1 or greater. Are there certain guys and names that you want our listeners to be aware of when they're trying to go through their handicapping, whether it be in a DFS lineup or looking to try and catch lightning in a bottle, much like Ricky Stenhouse was able to do last week as a 40-1 shot at Daytona?
Well, I think that the guys that we had talked about earlier in the week, and that's Eric Jones, Austin Dillon, and Eric Almirola. I think, you want to make sure that you're looking at this through the betting lens, right? So you're seeing Eric Jones kind of widely priced about 30-1. Austin Dillon, I think, is widely priced about 40-1. And then you have someone like Eric Almirola, where we've seen anywhere from 50 to, I think you said 150.
Yeah, there was a 150. I didn't grab it. I'm not sure it's still there. But you mentioned prices. Do you want to share what one familiar book actually opened Eric Jones at for this week, albeit with extremely low limits? That book shall remain nameless, by the way, but you're welcome to share that little tidbit if you'd like.
Yeah, someone opened Eric Jones at 100-1, and that's like not even paying attention, in my opinion. Like, did you even look at a box score? Eric Jones, I say he surprised the hell out of me last year. He, of all the drivers in all the silly season stuff, and when we say silly season, we mean just kind of the where guys end up, what teams, what contracts, with what crew chiefs. That's kind of the silly season. When we ever mention that, it's more what car each driver will be driving, not necessarily silly season as in like, just racing, but this is more the contractual side of the sport. I think Chris Bell really hurt him, and Chris Bell's an incredible talent, but Eric Jones kind of got shuffled out of the mix, and he's an incredible driver, and he's won on very impressive tracks. So I was shocked to see him have as much speed as he did last year in Fontana. Now, that win in Darlington that he had, I was not surprised. This guy, if he gets out there to lead, he's good enough to keep the lead and win a race. So, he's 30-1 across the board. I think he's a very popular pick with everybody, and rightfully so. It's, very little risk with a handsome reward. Certainly capable. But I'm going to want to see more out of that 43 team before I get involved at this point. I'd much rather see him unload fast, qualify well, and let, see a price of 18 to 20-1. Where I do think that there might be some additional value is with Noah Gragson, his new teammate. This guy is really, really good at high-tire
the NASCAR
tracks.
model of physical fitness, by the way, for those unfamiliar with Noah Gragson. Let's hope that he went through the offseason, took care of the breathing exercises, and want to make sure that he has a healthier approach to what he's going to do on track this season.
I was listening when I was at the Clash. They actually had Eric and Noah up, and they were talking about Noah's workout regimen. Either these guys are the greatest actors of all time, or Noah actually works out a lot, because they were so consistent. They didn't even break character. I for 2 seconds I was like, oh my gosh, Noah Gragson works out. But obviously I don't think that's super true, but it also could be. They did such a good job of maintaining a straight face. However, I do think that there's going to be some upside with Gragson at some point this year. That the Xfinity cars handle much differently than these Cup cars. But anytime that there's a high tire wear and someone's running that high line, Noah is not afraid to get up there and get after it and make up time. So I'm hoping that he has a chance to maybe get involved in some races, maybe steal a win somewhere. But I think at this point in the season, I'd rather see some fast practice times and some good qualifying before I get involved with Jones or Gragson. Now, Austin Dillon's a completely different story. Austin Dillon is a proven driver over a long period of time. And I think that Kyle Busch being his teammate, I think it really helps him. It's hard to really quantify what that number might be or how much he's helping him. But if you look at just the Clash, I would say arguably the best car was Austin Dillon at certain points in that race. And, same thing when it came to the Daytona 500. I mean, he was right there with Kyle Busch when, obviously there was a caution. So I think that there's tremendous upside on Austin Dillon. And the other thing, too, is he's going to be racing the Xfinity Series. And I think that any time that a Cup driver races the day before in the Xfinity Series, they are one adjustment ahead of other Cup guys that did not race in that series. So it's hard to put, again, another number on what that is worth, but I would say just one adjustment ahead. They know what an adjustment to the track bar is going to do. They know what some air pressure is going to do to the handling of the race car, and I think that could prove beneficial for Austin Dillon this week. And at a 40-1 price and some handsome top 5 and top 10 prices, I don't think he's a bad investment.
Dillon has been one of those drivers over the years that I've had a real hard time trying to handicap, mainly in his head-to-head matchups, because I'm not sure if the talent is necessarily there, and I don't mean this as a dig by any stretch of the imagination, but you look at the steps that he's taken to get to this point in his racing career. It doesn't hurt that your grandfather is a team owner and you're always in very good equipment. RCR obviously bridged the gap with the next-gen car, and we'll see if Dillon, to your point, can lean on that relationship with Kyle Busch. They can share some of their findings and have a slightly more symbiotic relationship than Austin Dillon can glean from Tyler Reddick, who is very talented, but just doesn't have that same memory bank, that same amount of data for Kyle Busch to be able to translate it as they bounce some ideas off each other. When you talk about Eric Jones and you look at some of the matchups that we could expect as far as on-screen is concerned, he's matched up against Chase Briscoe, and Eric Jones matched up against Austin Dillon. So odds makers staying one step ahead of some of the guys that we may have wanted to zero in on to try and bet them in their head-to-heads this particular weekend. But no doubt, guys, that could crash the back half of the top 10. And to your point, if you shop around some pretty advantageous prices, should you want to get involved a little bit early or maybe wait to see exactly how good these machines will be. You can follow Chris on Twitter at ChrisWormy15. I'm Todd Furman. You, of course, can follow me there as well. Most importantly, as always, for all things Stay Green, follow Bet the Board Pod. Wormser, we gave out Kyle Busch to win the series championship. That number has been on the move since we recorded our preseason preview. And for the best bet portion of the program, I have to ask, what have you identified pre-week to try and get our listeners in a positive state of mind and begin to build the bankroll for the 3-race West Coast swing?
Oh, we're sticking with our boy. Kyle Busch, top 10, minus 150. At Barstool Sports and also Bovada.
Wait, you can actually bet at Bovada? I figured you were kicked out of there about 100 years ago.
My max bet's $10. I'm just telling you for the listeners.
Very helpful.
They
now
can
our
bet
listeners are
whatever
going,
they
man, this guy says he bets NASCAR for a living. What the hell is he living on Jack in the Box if he's betting top 10s at minus 150 for $10 a throw?
Well, I was just saying for those of us that don't have access, not to say those of us, I do have a Barstool account.
You also have kiosk access, so you can take full advantage of those numbers there, or send someone that shares your surname to be your runner.
Yes, exactly. So I think Kyle Busch, I wanted to get him involved in the card at a certain point. And most of the time, I am the person that says, listen, Kyle's either they're going to be really good or he might struggle, and therefore maybe take a top 3 or a win payout. However, I think that Fontana is very, very different with the 7 or 8 lines. Yes, 7 or 8 lines that you have available. And I'm not talking about lines like betting lines. I'm talking about lines like you have the bottom, you have like the bottom, you have just above the bottom. Like you can run 6 or 7 wide at this track. I think it's very, very easy to make up a ton of positions in 3 or 4 laps. So in most cases, I would say I think Kyle's either going to be hit or miss. But I do think Kyle's going to be a hit. But if he does have a mistake somewhere along the road or along the race, he will be able to make that up because of the how wide this track is. So that's why I think the safest bet is to bet Kyle Busch top 10 at minus 150, because even if he has an issue and he finds himself outside the top 15 with 10 laps to go, this is a track where he can make it up. So I think that's why this is the safest bet. Kyle Busch, minus 150.
And I have to ask, obviously, because we talked about how we build our portfolios at the top of the show, the stuff that you bet pre-week that we're going to give out on the Stay Green podcast, full positions, do you go partial? How do you kind of set that up for the stuff you're moving on? Because for those folks who are tuning in for the first time, this is a little bit different than what we do for the NFL, college football, and a lot of the other sports we cover. We'll offer a best bet here when we record during the week, and we'll also give out a head-to-head or some other matchup-based option on race day when those numbers become widely available, limits raise, and we have a chance to get down at the same time the listeners do.
So I actually thought about this. My dad was kind of saying, as he's now an avid follower and bettor of the sport, he thought I should be more exact on what, how much I bet at certain points of the week. So I'll just say now, if anything that I bet now is 1/4 of what I will bet after practice and qualifying. So I think you should kind of follow that same logic. Anywhere from 1/4 to 1/2 on this pick before practice and qualifying, and then when we give our race day pick, I would say that you should probably double up the amount that you're betting.
No, and I think that's great advice, because not only are we here to kind of educate a lot of our listeners on the sport itself and what goes into handicapping, but the betting process of it is very different for a lot of folks. And every sport offers up unique opportunities, nuances, and challenges. So we'll try and continue to outline the way we go about doing business. The goal for us is for you guys to watch these races and most importantly be profitable with the selections that we're sharing with you on each and every Stay Green podcast, which leads me to the next point that I want you guys that are out there that may have questions. Chris has his DMs open. I don't, because I've dealt with a number of issues in the past. So feel free to send questions to him or use the hashtag Stay Green. And as we start to get more and more listener feedback incorporated in here, we want to be able to answer the questions that you guys feel are most prescient to you, because we may take some of the things for granted, having done this as long as we have. At the same time, if there's a question that you have, there is no such thing as a dumb question. We'll do it to address it and try and take advantage of a long-form concept, because we do this podcast for you, the listener, first and foremost. It's not so Chris can hear himself talk and pat himself on the back when he bets Kyle Larson or Kyle Busch as frequently as he might throughout the course of the 2023 season.
Yeah. No, I enjoy interacting, and any question is helpful, not only to provide just information, but also it helps me, because sometimes I don't think about my explanation enough. And so if someone can just kind of come with an honest question, I'd like to work through it with them, and maybe we come up with a new bet. There's been a few times when someone has DM'd me a question about a driver, and that's turned into, wow, maybe you're onto something here, and there might be some value and a way to make some money. So please don't hesitate. Reach out. Like I said, or like Todd said, the DMs are open, at least for now. I have got 780 followers or something like that. Proud of every one of them. But I enjoy doing this. It is truly my passion. And I feel like when people ask me what I do for a living, I almost want to say retired, because when a hobby becomes a job or becomes a career, you're ultimately retired. So certainly interact on social media.
Well, the good thing is,
doing it.
your follower count continues to climb, and there are more people that follow you on social media than tune in for the ARCA races. So you have that going for you, which is a step in the right direction. And illustration or exhibit 372, why I try not to keep my DMs open. Shot a note back and forth with your boy Rory before. Guy slides into my DMs more than anybody else on the face of the planet, asking for this, that, or the other. We love Rory, but there's a reason that's not open. But again, we're back for season 2. We're thrilled to be here. We shared a lot of our thought process early on in the show. Didn't want to kind of harp on that. But again, I want to reiterate, we do this for you guys, the listeners. So interact with us, share, tell people about everything we're doing for Stay Green. We know NASCAR may be unfamiliar territory for those folks accustomed to betting the NFL, betting college football, betting college basketball, but it can be just as profitable. And our goal is to help make you money every step of the way and teach you what goes into the handicapping equation each and every episode. So follow Chris on Twitter at ChrisWormy15. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And come Sunday afternoon from Auto Club Speedway in Fontana, California, with a Kyle Busch top 10 ticket in hand. Hopefully we'll see you at the window.